Hey everybody, welcome to the Mana League's Dragons of Tarkir set review for the color green. We've only got one more video to go tomorrow, and then we'll be done the entire set. We're going to jump right on into this review. No disclaimers today. If you need to know what this set review is all about, go check out the previous days if you haven't already. Plus, you want to check those out anyways to get the rest of the set. We're only going to be talking about green today. But we're going to jump right on into our first card. We have Aether Bow Masters. This is a 2 green 3/4 creature Hound Archer at common. It has reach, and it also has Megamorph for 5 and a green. This seems pretty solid to me. A 6 mana 4/5 reach or a 4 mana 3/4 reach seems pretty good in a set with the most flyers ever printed. I may not necessarily really feel the need to Megamorph this all that often. In a lot of cases, I'll be happy just playing this on turn 4 and blocking a good amount of their flyers for the next several turns. It's not going to, stand up to the rare dragons later on, but it's really going to hold its own for quite some time. And of course, later in the game, if you need to, you can make this a 4/5 reach that will stand its ground at least a little bit more often. This guy's not amazing. He's just a role filler. He's the reach blocker kind of filler. Keep in mind, this can attack. It's a 3/4 that can attack. It's a 4/5 that can attack. It feels like it should have defender for some reason, but it doesn't. It can fully attack as much as it wants to. I'm pretty happy with this. It's not a bomb. It's not a super high pick, but it's a solid C+ for me. It feels just a little bit too plain for me to bump it up to B-, but it could even be there. It's just a solid card. I doubt I'll cut this very often at all. I don't think I'll want multiples of it really, but the first one seems totally fine to me. Next up we have Artillerist. This is a 2 and a green 4/1 creature Hound Archer at common, and it says Artillerist has reach as long as it has a +1/+1 counter on it. So as long as it's a 5/2, because it has a counter, not for any other reason, it'll have reach. A 5/2 with reach is called Archers of Karsi, and it was basically unplayable in Fate Reforged and Cons. This won't have defender, so it will still be a gigantic attacker, but it's not exactly a green creature attacker. A 5/2 or a 4/1 it's kind of Red's domain. Red is all about the high power, low toughness, aggressive creatures. This isn't necessarily what every green deck is going to want to do. The red-green deck maybe, but there's going to be some green decks where this is just going to be a little bit weak. Not only that, but getting a counter on it does take some work. I see a lot of people just saying, well, Bolster's in the set. This guy's going to get every Bolster counter ever. And that's not necessarily true. He'll get the first Bolster counter, but after that, there's not necessarily a guarantee that he's going to be the lowest toughness guy on the battlefield. And not only that, you do have to play a bolster card. And not all of the bolster cards are playable. You'll get some, but you shouldn't include a bad bolster card just because you have an okay bolster target in your deck somewhere. Because you have to draw both of those cards to make it good. That's kind of my argument against the Aven Sunstriker as well, but we'll leave that one be. That one generated a bit of debate in some places. But yeah, I don't necessarily like jumping through hoops in order to make this into an Archers of Karsi that can attack. This seems okay if you need it, but I would not play this presuming that of course it's going to have reach, because that's just not a solid enough guarantee for me to play it. It's the same as that white creature that gets flying as long as it has a counter on it, except that's a whole lot better than this guy. So I'm going to go with a C- on him. He seems totally cuttable to me. Next up is Survivalist. This is a 1 and a green 2/1 creature Hound Shaman at uncommon, and it has Megamorph for 1 and a green as well, so its Megamorph is the same as its casting cost. And it says when Survivalist is turned face up, destroy target artifact or enchantment an opponent controls. This is not for limited. This is for kind of constructed. This is a pretty good card for cubes. It's a good card in formats where there's a lot of threatening artifacts and threatening enchantments kicking around. And that's just not the case in Dragons Fate Limited. There's the Citadel Sieges, and this guy is an absolute include if you see a Citadel Siege or a Palace Siege or really any of the sieges outside of perhaps Frontier Siege on the other side of the battlefield. But those are rares. In one single pack in the draft, there may not even be a single one in your entire draft pod. So this guy is not main deckable because of the ability. He's just main deckable because he's a solid creature. You know, a 2/1 for 2 is fine. Again, not quite what green usually does. There's a number of creatures like this that feel way more like red creatures in their stats. The destroy target artifact or enchantment, of course, is a very green ability, though. You know, the nice thing with this guy is that he's totally fine being played as a 2/1 for 2, and he's totally fine being played as a 3/2 that turns face up on turn 4. Like, he's totally fine either way. It seems like something that I'm going to include in most of my green decks. The ability is, you know, maybe in the entire season I'll get a value out of the ability once, but I'll get far more value out of this just being a 2/1 or a 3/2 attacker. So solid C for me, just a, you know, a straight up include. You know, if you have other stuff better, cut it, and if you don't, be totally okay playing it. Next up, we have the card I've been referring to all week long. We have Assault Formation. This is a 1 and a green enchantment at rare. And it says, each creature you control assigns combat damage equal to its toughness, rather than its power. Also, you can pay a green mana, and target creature with Defender can attack this turn, as though it didn't have Defender. As well, you can pay 2 and a green, and creatures you control get +0/+1 until end of turn. So this is a strange card. It sounds really kind of cool. It's the enabler for that Toughness Matters deck that I've been talking about all week long. Of course, Grim Contest goes along with that, and then along with it goes all of those various low power, big toughness creatures that we've been seeing. You know, Wandering Tower Shell becomes kind of basically a 6/6. Which seems pretty good. The issue, of course, with that Toughness Matters deck is that it is a first pick this and go into it deck, because if you just start taking the Toughness Matters cards without having seen this card yet, you may just end up with an awful deck. Unlike Black-White Warriors, you can try to force Warriors, and if you don't get there, you're going to still have a bunch of good stuff. The Toughness Matters deck, you're going to have a bunch of garbage. So it's risky, but I am so looking forward to at least once first picking this and going all in on it. The Defender clause is interesting. You know, paying a single green is not that big of a cost to make your defenders into attackers, but you do pay the cost by having those creatures out. The other important thing to keep in mind is that, yeah, you might have drafted this, and yeah, you might have built a deck around it, and yeah, it's in your deck, but that doesn't mean you're going to draw it. You have to draw this card for your deck to still do anything, and I think that's going to be the biggest speed bump for this card doing anything, is that you have to build around it, but you also have to get this on the battlefield for your deck to do much of anything. So I just don't know about this, unfortunately. Realistically, I have to give this, I don't know, I think a D plus. Realistically, I don't think it's good enough because the deck that's built around it requires you drawing and playing this card, and this card alone. And that's far too risky for me when I'm actually trying to do well in a draft. Some Wacky Wednesday, I'm going to draw this, and whatever my plan was for that Wacky Wednesday is out the window, and we're doing the toughness deck. But at F&M, on Spiky Saturday, at GPs, at competitive events, I think I'm just going to pass this every single time, unfortunately. So as cool as this is, as awesome as this will be in casual and other various formats, I've got to go with a D, and that makes me a little bit sad, unfortunately. Next up, we have a Tarka Beastbreaker. This is a 1 and a green 2/2 creature human warrior at common, so it's a bear. But it does have text. It says Formidable. Pay 4 and a green, a Tarka Beastbreaker gets +4/+4 until end of turn. Activate this ability only if creatures you control have total power 8 or greater. So it's a bear on turn 2, which is precisely where you want a bear, and it's a bear on turn 3 and on turn 4, and probably still on turn 5 and maybe even 6. But at some point, someday, you're going to have 8 power on the battlefield, and you can pump 5 mana into this, which is a lot, to make it into 3 bears. You can make it into a 6/6. And that seems fine. You know, this is kind of a value bear. This is a an investment bear. It's a bear that gets better in the late game, which is, my favorite kind of bear, really. Even as a bear, this is 100% totally playable. Cuttable if you have a whole bunch of other better stuff, and totally playable and not remotely upsetting if you don't. The fact that he has a bit of value attached onto him, the fact that if I top deck this guy on turn 10, the game has gone long for some reason, I'm totally fine putting him down and pumping some mana into him to make him into a relevant creature for that time. I'm just pretty happy with this guy. I got to give him a C+. He's nothing beyond that. He's not amazing. He's not going to, blow people away. He's not going to completely warp the game, but he's just a really, really solid guy. As I've said before, I haven't said it today yet, but I need to play with Formidable to get a handle on just how commonly you're going to have it. I think you're going to have it more often than not when you're, playing cards that need it. But, keep in mind that Formidable does mean that you're probably doing well, or at absolute worst, you're stabilized or stalled. So this guy may not be that good if you're behind. Of course, bears generally aren't that good if you're behind anyways. But do keep that in mind for all Formidable cards, is that they do lose a lot of their luster in that quadrant where you are kind of behind and need to get back into the game. But yeah, just like Grizzly Bears, just like all the value bears in Magic's history, this is totally fine, totally playable, C+. Cut it if you have a wealth of good stuff and play it any other time otherwise. Next up, we have Avatar of the Resolute. This is a green-green 3/2 creature avatar at rare. It has reach, it has trample. It also says Avatar of the Resolute enters the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter on it for each other creature you control with a +1/+1 counter on it. A 3/2 for green-green is fantastic. There was a card in Born of the Gods called Swordwise Centaur. It was a green-green 3/2 centaur. I picked that so highly. I played it so many times in heavy green decks and loved it. A 3/2 on turn 2 is awesome. Give it reach and trample, even better. The ability thing is interesting. I don't know if the counter deck is going to exist in Dragon's Fate. But if it does, this guy just gets even better. The downside, of course, is you don't want to play him on turn 2 at that point. So he doesn't become a 2-drop 3/2. He becomes more likely a turn 5 or turn 6 drop. But the benefit there is that he has that versatility. If I were to draw him on turn 2, and even if I had planned on him being a big guy late in the game and I had a bunch of counters, I'd still probably play him on turn 2. And then if I was playing that counter deck and I drew him on turn 6, I'd be pretty happy playing him on turn 6 and probably getting some counters on him too. So, this guy's nice because he kind of really hits the battlefield in a relevant way throughout the entire game if you are having that counter strategy, if you do have a fair amount of bolster going on. And even if you don't, he's still totally fine. Yeah, I've got to see how the counter deck kind of does. The counter deck in the previous formats was awesome because there was Outlast, which was counters on demand on a lot of creatures. Now you're going to be relying on Bolster, which I'm not as big on. It's definitely good, but it's still just a bit wonky. It's not quite there as a, just awesome mechanic because of the fact that you can't target it and that it does have to, go towards your generally weakest creature, which sometimes can be a pretty awful creature, and the bolster isn't really going to make it that much more relevant. I'm just not super high on bolster. I do like it, don't get me wrong. I'm just not as high on it as Outlast for building a specific counter strategy. But that being said, I love this guy. B- for sure. I love 3/2s for green. Giving them a couple of abilities right away, plus an extra ability that's super relevant later in the game, especially in specific decks, just seems great to me. B- for me. Next up, we have Circle of Elders. Circle of Elders is a 2 green 2/4 creature human shaman at uncommon, and it has vigilance. It also has Formidable. It says tap, add 3 to your mana pool. Activate this ability only if creatures you control have total power 8 or greater. So this is a 2/4 vigilance for 4. That's a fairly standard set of stats with Vigilance. Often it's given to Knights, I believe. It's just kind of fine. It's generally very unexciting. It's a, slightly better blocker than it is anything. It's something you can attack in for a little bit of damage, and then it's still untapped back on your battlefield to block the next turn, and can probably block a number of things. Although coming down on turn 4, it's going to get outclassed in a few turns. It's not going to be blocking everything forever. The formidable ability is fun. It's a good amount of ramp, but I feel like by the time you're consistently going to have 8 power on the field, an extra 3 mana being available isn't really going to be all that much. You're probably going to be pretty out of cards, and you're probably not going to be needing to cast things that are worth 10 mana or something crazy like that. So, I want this to be better than it is, but I just don't think it's going to get there, just because it's ultimately, I think, just going to be a 2/4 with Vigilance for 4, because I don't think the ability is super relevant because of the fact that it doesn't turn on until so late in the game. So I'm going to go with just I think a C here. I had C- originally, but I see it as being a better include just based on its stats. But yeah, I don't highly value the formidable ability on this all that highly. Next up, we have Collected Company. This is a 3 and a green instant at rare, and it says, look at the top 6 cards of your library. Put up to 2 creature cards with converted mana cost 3 or less from among them onto the battlefield. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in any order. So you get to just take a look at the top 6 cards of your library. That's a decent chunk, and you get to take 2 creatures who have a CMC of 3 or less and throw them down. How good is that? Well, it's turn 4, and we're getting 2 3-drops for the price of 1 1/3. That's not a huge discount. It is a discount, but it's not a huge discount. And honestly, I think that unless you have some really, really good 3-drops, either they're very powerful rare 3-drops, or they're 3-drops that will continue to be relevant later in the game. They grow somehow, or they have a good ability, or they do something. Unless you have those, I don't see this card being all that good. I don't want to pay 4 mana to get a 3-drop, and realistically not necessarily having another 3-drop to choose from. Maybe you have to do a 3-drop and a 2-drop, or a 3-drop and a 1-drop, depending on what you get in your top 6. You need to know your deck through and through, of course. You need to know what's left in your library, and when you're deck building, you need to plan it to maximize the value out of this. But I just don't see the value of this being all that high. This seems like a card for Modern. It seems like a card for Commander. It seems like a card where there are a lot of creatures that you can put in your deck at 3 or less that are really, really good to get out at even a slight discount. In Limited, I just don't think there's enough creatures for this to be all that crazy and all that powerful. So I'm going to go with a C- here, with the caveat that if you can really, really build around this with a lot of powerful small things, it might be a little bit better. But I think in your average deck, this is just a C-. I think it's cuttable if you need to. Next up, we have Colossa Donyearling. This is a 2 and a green, 2/4, creature beast at common with no rules text. It is just a vanilla 2/4 for 3. I just got done saying that a 2/4 for 4 was kind of the standard cost, with Vigilance anyways, and that it was sort of fine to have. A 2/4 for 3 without Vigilance is also sort of fine to have. It doesn't make it awesome or anything. It doesn't make it, a card that you're super happy to include. It just makes it playable. Now, this, of course, lends itself more to a ramp deck where you are on turn 3. Preferably, you'd be ramping. You'd be getting more land out or doing something, playing some other spell, maybe one of the ones we'll see later, and not playing a 2/4. But if you don't have those spells, a 2/4 blocker will hold the ground for a little bit until you can continue ramping up and getting into those bigger things. So, this is a boring vanilla thing that you're going to play when you need it and not going to play otherwise. So that's the definition of a C to me. Next up, we have Conifer Strider. Conifer Strider is a 3 and a green 5/1 creature elemental at common, and it has hexproof. Yet again, another one of these red stats cards. Green doesn't usually get 5/1s. Red gets 5/1s, sure. Green doesn't get 5/1s, but this one's green, of course, because it has hexproof. Hexproof is not necessarily a red ability all that commonly. Now, people will tend to look at this card and say, oh man, it's hexproof. It has 1 toughness, yeah, whatever. They can't burn this, they can't kill this, they can't throw stuff at this. This is awesome. But it's not. The removal doesn't touch it, but 99% of the creatures in the format just kind of have to look at this guy and it dies. There's no trample on this. There's no flying. There's no cannot be blocked. There's none of that. And that makes this kind of weak to me. Now, it is something that, to use a Magic turn of phrase, wears pants well. This can be suited up with stuff. This can have... It's probably not the best play to put these 2 cards in your deck, but you could put this down with a rune mark on it. You could throw down the first strike rune mark or the flying rune mark on it or something like that, and start to build kind of a better creature. But we're not in Theros. We're not Voltroning onto a creature all that commonly. And again, unless you get something really cool on this guy, it's just not going to be that good. Everything looking at this guy kills it. It just feels too fragile for me to want to play it very much, and I don't necessarily want to jam a bunch of cards into my deck that I wouldn't play otherwise, like rune marks, just because I have this guy. So ultimately, I think he's pretty cuttable. I've got him at a C-. I'd play him if I had to, but I'd really prefer not to have to. Next up, we have Deathmist Raptor. Deathmist Raptor is a 1 green 3/3 creature lizard beast. I'd say it's a dinosaur, but it's a lizard beast at Mythic Rare. It has Death Touch. It also says whenever a permanent you control is turned face up, you may return Deathmist Raptor from your graveyard to the battlefield face up or face down. It also has Megamorph for 4 and a green. So, there's a lot going on this guy. Seems pretty fun and kind of hard to grade without playing it. I can say unequivocally it's good, but I don't know where on my grading scale good is falling for this guy. A 3/3 Death Touch for 3, awesome. All the time. Love it. Absolutely. The Death Touch doesn't need to be there, but it's cool that it is. We've talked about that before. I'm not going to get into that again right now. Solid include right there, just as a 3/3 Death Touch for 3. The fact that I could also, if I didn't have 2 green mana, or just if I wanted to, throw it down as a morph, and then on-morph it for 5 mana, slightly more expensive, but making it into a 4/4 Death Touch seems pretty darn solid to me as well. And there's an awful lot of morph in this format, so you're going to be turning things face up. So even if this guy dies, you can play something, on-morph it, and he's back on the battlefield in whichever configuration you want. He's back on the battlefield face up as a 3/3 Death Touch if that's what you need, and he's face down as a 2/2 that's going to on-morph into a 4/4 Death Touch if that's what you need. The recursion's really cool, and it's not going to be even slightly difficult to pull off, I don't think. So I think this guy's really, really, really good. I'm going to go with an A on him. I think he's just a solid include. The recursion is probably the best part of this thing. He just gets better and better the more morphs you play. And you're going to play a fair number of morphs, just like straight up cons you did. So I'm pretty happy with this guy. Solid first pick, solid include. Just bordering on bomb territory, I think. I think the recursion's enough for me to say that this guy is bomby-ish, I would say. So solid A for me. Very happy to play this guy. Very happy to see him in my pack. Next up, we have Den Protector. Den Protector is a 1 and a green 2/1 creature human warrior at rare. It says creatures with power less than Den Protector's power can't block it. So 2 if it's just played for 2. It also has Megamorph for 2, 1 and a green. And it says when Den Protector is turned face up, return target creature card from your graveyard to your hand. So you can get a 3/2 that can't be blocked by creatures that are 2 or lower, so less than 3. This seems pretty good to me. A 2/1 for 2 is always pretty solid. Again, slightly red stats than green here. It seems kind of strange to me in this set, but whatever. It's just the way the set is. You can play this as a 2-1 for 2 and be totally happy. You can morph this and then turn it up for a 3-2 with regrowth attached to it, which is pretty darn solid. Regrowth is a decent card. Regrowth is a very old card that allows you to just take any card you want from your graveyard back to your hand. It doesn't have to be a creature, like a lot of the recursion we've had lately is. So you can get your removal back. You can get anything you want back from the graveyard. And it's even nicer when regrowth is just kind of pasted on a decent body. I'm pretty happy with this card as well. It's not a bomb. It's not Death Mist Raptor. It is just a 3-2 once it's flipped up and you've gotten your card back. But boy, is it a good 3-2, and boy, is getting that card back on turn 5 or later going to be good. Because, of course, remember, by turn 5 or 6, when this turns face up, you're probably going to have played some removal. You're probably going to have used one of your potentially premium removal spells. And this is just going to put it right back in your hand, and that is awesome. Very happy with this guy. Very happy to see him in my packs. I'm going to give it a B+ for sure. And slam it into my deck and be very happy with it. All right, that's a couple of good cards in a row. What's the next one? Well, the next one is Display of Dominance. It is a 1 and a green instant at uncommon, and it says choose one. Destroy target blue or black non-creature permanent, or permanents you control can't be the targets of blue or black spells your opponents control this turn. So this is green's color hoser, the last one of the cycle. So unfortunately, we're not going to get another A. We're going to get another D. This, of course, is sideboard only material. You're going to use the first mode pretty rarely, I think. What would you use it on? You'd use it on Palace Siege. And then what? Not much, really. This card's going to be used, I'm going to say, almost exclusively for the second ability, preventing your permanents from being the targets of blue or black spells that your opponents control this turn. Now, of course, that phrase sounds a lot more awesome than it is. Realistically, that second phrase is going to be target permanent you control gains hexproof in response to a removal spell. You're not going to be, ruining your opponent's day by meaning that they can't cast 7 spells at you this turn. They're probably only going to have been casting 1 spell that you're going to prevent with this and still be fairly happy with. It does sort of give green a counter spell. That's basically what you're going to be doing with that second ability. I'll, of course, side it in against blue-black if I see any removal coming from them, and in a blue-black deck, I would expect them to have a good amount. Against just a blue or just a black deck, I don't know how often I would side it in. Probably more often against a black deck than against a blue deck, just because black's going to have a lot more removal, and blue's not going to have all that much. So, interesting card, but just like the rest, it's a D. It's a card that's not going to be main deckable, but you're going to be happy to have it when you come across that deck. Next up is Dragon Scarred Bear. This is a 2 and a green 3-2 creature bear at common, and it has Formidable. For 1 and a green, you can regenerate Dragon Scarred Bear. Activate this ability only if creatures you control have total power 8 or greater. So it's a slightly bigger bear, slightly smaller alpine grizzly that way late in the game can get regenerate. So, it's interesting. Regenerate generally is something you want to have on a blocker. So I guess the plan for this guy is to play him on turn 3, have a 3-2, attack a few times, and then late in the game, he just sits back and he stops your opponent's ground bombs from attacking you, which isn't necessarily the best thing. I don't want to be doing this in green all that often. I'd prefer this guy to just be an alpine grizzly most of the time, I think. That being said, alpine grizzly's gone. That was a cons card. It's not around anymore, so maybe 3-2 for 3 is kind of what we have to deal with this time now. But, I don't know. This guy just seems middle of the road to me. The formidability is okay, but I just don't see it being super, super, super relevant. Yeah, by the time you get 8 power, I don't see it being super relevant that late in the game. So I'm just going to give this guy a C. You know, not much going on here. Include if you need it. Don't if you have better. That's about all I can say about it, unfortunately. Next up is Dramacos Gift. Dramacos Gift is a 4 and a green instant at uncommon, and it says bolster 4. And that's all it says. So this is the natural evolution of cached defenses, I guess. Cached defenses was a 3 and a green instant that gave you bolster 3. This is a 4 and a green instant that gives you bolster 4. Cached defenses, I don't really think was playable at all. I certainly never played it. I was never really a fan of bolster for the absolute sake of bolstering. I prefer bolster to be incidental, and I prefer it to be repeatable. I don't like it just being the only thing a card does. Oh, sorry, Cash Defenses was actually a sorcery, making it even worse. That makes Dramacos Gift a little bit better, that it is instant speed, so it can be a combat trick, but boy, is that an expensive combat trick. You know, I guess you have to pay for 4 +1/+1 counters. That is an awful lot, but I just don't like this card all that much. I'm going to give it a D+. I'm not a fan of A, combat tricks that cost that much, and B, bolstering for the sake of bolstering. Luckily, even if this hits a 1/1, it's going to turn it into a 5/5, so you don't care quite as much about the fact that you can't target it, that it has to go on the weakest toughness creature you have. But yeah, I just don't like my combat tricks, especially in green, to cost all that much. So I'm going to go with D+. I could see it maybe being playable if the format is actually pretty slow, which I still don't have a good handle on. And if the format does end up slow, I think a number of my grades need to be bumped up a little tiny bit, like half a grade, because I am approaching this as though aggro is still a very viable thing, and as though the format is going to still be relatively speedy. So yeah, I'm going to go with a D+ on my assumption of the format and how I'm going to be approaching it, but with the caveat that if the format truly does slow down a ton, I could see this being C- maybe. Next up, we have Epic Confrontation. This, of course, is the punch of this format. It's not Savage Punch. He's not punching a bear. He's now punching a dragon, it looks like. This is a 1 and a green sorcery at common, and it says target creature you control gets +1/+2 until end of turn. It fights target creature you don't control. So it's slightly weaker than Savage Punch because your creature is getting +1/+2 instead of +2/+2, but your creature is always getting +1/+2, whereas Savage Punch required Ferocious. Savage Punch was totally fine. The +2/+2 that you sometimes got made it even better. Wow, do I ever want Savage Punch to have been instant speed, just like I would love this to be instant speed, but that might be a bit too powerful at 2 mana. Losing half the power, but always getting that half the power seems totally fine to me. This is relatively solid green removal. This is what green gets for removal usually. It's not premium, but it's pretty darn solid. I give it a B-. I think it's just a solid pickup when you see it coming around. Not first pickable, but second pickable maybe. Third, fourth, fifth for sure. I would consider taking this and be pretty happy including it in probably every green deck. So yeah, B- for me. Next up, we have Explosive Vegetation. This is a reprint, although I can't quite remember from where. A quick check shows me that it was from Onslaught, so shortly after I quit Magic the first time around. So it's a 3 and a green sorcery at uncommon, and it says search your library for up to 2 basic land cards, put them onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle your library. So, this is a little bit more expensive Rampant Growth, but you get 2 lands. So turn 1, play a land. Turn 2, turn 3, turn 4, play a land. Play this, get 2 lands. Turn 5, play a land. You're at 7 mana. You're 2 turns ahead of your opponent. You're into game-ending territory on turn 5. That's pretty darn good. I love ramp. I'm a huge fan of ramp in cube, where ramp, of course, is super supported. I'm a big fan of ramp in almost all formats that have any kind of cards like this, let alone one that's going to ramp me 2 turns ahead on turn 4. I'm pretty happy with this card just because it kind of goes into what I like to do in the format. And there are enough big, bomby creatures in green, or at least sharing a color with green, that I think this has a pretty good place. This is something that I'd be okay doing on turn 4. The caveat being that I would like to have done something on turn 2 and turn 3 on my board. I would have liked to have morphed and maybe played a tube drop, a bear or something, so that I feel okay taking turn 4 off to do this. As long as I've done that, I'm going to be very happy to do this on turn 4. Yeah, I like this card. I like ramp. My ramp bias is probably taking me over a little tiny bit, but I'm going to give this a C+. I want to play with this card. I want to see how it works in this format because I do love ramp quite a bit. If my ramp bias is coloring this a little bit too rosy, then maybe it's a bit lower realistically. But for me, for the first time I see this card in a pack, it's going to be a C+ for me. Next up, we have the last rare dragon monocolored anyways. We have Faux Razor Regent. This is a 5 green 4/5 creature dragon at rare with flying. And it says when Faux Razor Regent enters the battlefield, you may have it fight target creature you don't control. Whenever a creature you control fights, put 2 +1/+1 counters on it at the beginning of the next end step. So there's a lot going on here. First off, it's a 4/5 for 7, which is bad. Do not play a 4/5 flyer for 7. Just don't. Ideally, it kills something right away, which bumps the value up a little bit. Ideally, you get to kill a 4/4 or a 4 less than 4 toughness creature, and this survives. Because if it survives to the end of the turn, it's going to become a 6/7. Now, a 6/7 flyer sounds more like something I'd be happy to play on turn 7. The problem I have with this card, and it's not a huge problem, when we get to the grade, I like this card. The problem is that that ability is probably not going to trigger anymore. You know, maybe you get Epic Confrontation on turn 8, 9, 10, whatever. You haven't already played it in the game. But there's not all that much fight going around. You know, in Dragons, Epic Confrontation is the only other fight card other than this one. In Fate Reforged, you have Grim Contest, Hunt the Weak, and then at Rare, Temur War Shaman. There's just not that much fight that I think you're probably ever going to trigger this dragon's ability a second time. That being said, the fact that it's going to trigger once, and you're presumably going to have this thing live and get a 6/7, seems fairly okay to me. You know, I can't fully be happy with a 7-drop. I just don't like them. They're so expensive. They need to basically win the game for me, and it depends on how often this guy's going to clear the path when he comes down. I hope it's going to be relatively regularly. There are a lot of flyers in the format, but hopefully he gets to kill your opponent's biggest one and then can just, over a few turns, slam himself into the other ones, or you can clear the path in other ways. So I'm happy enough with this guy. I actually give him an A-. I definitely think I've sounded kind of down on this guy, but I do give him an A-. I'm going to probably first pick him when I see him, at least early in the format. If the format is slow, this guy is definitely solid. Unfortunately, if it is fast, I think he might just be a bit too expensive. I just have to caution, you know, don't get too excited about that second ability, or that technically third ability, because I just don't think it's going to trigger past the very first time. But that being said, the first time it triggers is going to be pretty darn solid for me. Next up, we have Glade Watcher. This is a 1 and a green 3/3 creature elemental at common, and it has Defender. It also has Formidable. You can pay a green, and Glade Watcher can attack this turn as though it didn't have Defender. Activate this ability only if creatures you control have total power 8 or greater. A 3/3 defender for 2? Not necessarily what I want to be doing. Not necessarily what I want to be doing in green usually. It's sure as heck not a winning plan. Playing 3/3 defenders is not how you win a game. It's how you stop yourself from losing quite as quickly. The fact that you might be able to start attacking with this guy someday is okay. But if you have 5 other power on the battlefield later in the game, is a 3/3 really what you're super excited to be attacking with? Not really, it's ultimately seems a little bit weak to me. The one saving grace of this card is that the activation cost by the time you have 8 power on the battlefield is basically negligible. A single green, that's not backbreaking in any way, shape, or form. So I think the card's still okay. I just don't know that it's something that I want to be playing. I feel like it's going to open myself up to too many times where I'll have this and I'll get Formidable, and then my opponent will take Formidable away from me, leaving me with a piddly little defender that does nothing. So, I can't be too high on this guy. I'm going to give it a C, a middle-of-the-road C. I could maybe even see dropping this all the way down to a C-, but I'll give it a C for the time being. I'm just cautious about cards like this that are only really good if you're already kind of doing well. I wouldn't call this a win more card. It's not going to win you a game. It's just a utility creature by the time you're in a good position. But it is kind of in that category of cards. So I'm going to go with a C on it. Next up, we have Guardian Shieldbearer. This is a 1 and a green creature human soldier at common. It's a 2/1. It has Megamorph for 3 and a green. And it says, when Guardian Shieldbearer is turned face up, put a +1/+1 counter on another target creature you control. So this is a 2/1 for 2. Again, slightly red stats, but whatever. It's a 2/1 for 2, or it's a 3/2 for 4 with a 3-mana investment a turn earlier. It seems fairly decent and generally playable. The ideal play, of course, is to play a 2-drop, play this as your 3-drop, on Morph it, and have that +1/+1 counter go into whatever your 2-drop was. Be very careful. This does say another target creature. He doesn't get the counter himself. So if you flip this up and this is the only creature on the battlefield, that counter just floats away off into the ether and goes away. It loses a bit of its potential power because of that. But assuming that you can have something on the board before you trigger this, it just seems like a solid filler kind of green role player, what green wants to be doing. So I'm going to go with a C+ on it. It's not amazing. It's generally playable, though. I think you'll play this more than you'll cut it, but I don't think you're going to be overly excited about it, to be honest. All right, we finished up the rare dragon cycle. Let's finish up the uncommon dragon cycle. We have Herd Chaser Dragon. Just like the rest, it's a 5 and a green 3/3 creature dragon at uncommon with flying and trample in this case. And just like the rest, it has Megamorph for 5 green. When Herd Chaser Dragon is turned face up, put a +1/+1 counter on each other dragon creature you control. So we've talked about these dragons to death. I don't like 3/3s for 6 unless they have a super relevant ability. And even then, Lifelink got, I think, a C+ from me. Maybe a C. First Strike was in second place, I think, and I think it got a C-. Trample on a 3/3 flyer, I don't really care. Paying 7 mana to make it into a 4/4 flyer with Trample, well, that's a little bit better stats-wise, but a little bit worse mana-wise. It's going to need to be a really slow format for me to be in any way happy playing these dragons. And as we've talked about with that second ability, I don't think you're going to have enough dragons for that ability to really ever do anything. So, yeah, C- on this as well. I'm down on these dragons. I'd be happy to see them prove me wrong, but I just don't see it happening. They're way too expensive for what they actually do and what they actually are. So, C- on for me. Next up, we have Inspiring Call. Inspiring Call is a 2 and a green instant at uncommon. And it says, draw a card for each creature you control with a +1/+1 counter on it. Those creatures gain indestructible until end of turn. No. I do not want it. This card just seems awful. The variance on this card is too damn high. This could have worked okay with Outlast, where you had counters on demand on a number of different creatures. But in this format, you don't really have counters on demand. You do have Megamorph, which means you are going to have counters on anything that flips up. But the variance is still too high for me, even with that being the case. Even with Bolster, even with Megamorph, I don't see Inspiring Call being good enough for me. Yeah, maybe if it gave counters itself, even if it gave a counter, so it would at least guarantee me not to be a dead card in my hand sometimes. Yeah, I can't justify taking this card or playing it, really, so I've got to go with an F. Next up, we have Lurking Arinx. Arinx is some sort of lynx in Tarkir. This is a 4 and a green, 3/5 creature cat beast at uncommon. It has Formidable for 2 and a green. Target creature blocks Lurking Arinx this turn if able. Activate this ability only if creatures you control have total power 8 or greater. 3/5 for 5 is okay. It's pretty standard stats for 5, especially in white. White commonly gets 3/5s. Green not as much, but it still does, and they're kind of just most of the time. Now, you can force something to block this if you have a whole bunch of power on the battlefield, but I don't really see the value of that. You're going to have to make a 3 toughness thing block this in order to get some value out of killing it. And I just don't see there being that many super powerful, oh man, I want that dead, 3 toughness creatures. Of course, there's going to be 3 toughness creatures, and it's going to be pretty fine to make them die. But, I don't see big value coming out of this cat. I see just kind of some incidental value coming out of this cat. And minor incidental value isn't necessarily what I want to be wasting a creature slot on in the 5 drops area. So I got to go with C- on this one. It just doesn't seem that great to me. Just like most C-, it's there if you really need it, but I don't think you're going to be ever overly happy playing this. Next up, we have another Cons of Tarkir card. We have Naturalize. It's 1 and a green, instant at common, destroy target artifact or enchantment. Straight up solid sideboard, the prototypical sideboard card. You are not going to ever main deck this. You're going to, in game 1, see an enchantment, or your opponent's going to mention they have a Citadel Siege or something like that you're just afraid of, and you're going to sideboard this in. And if you don't, you're not going to play this. Don't main deck this. I've seen newer players main deck it thinking, well, what if I see an enchantment? Well, you're probably not gonna in most games, so don't waste a card slot on this. Just solid D. Next up, we have Obscuring Aether. Obscuring Aether is a single green enchantment at rare, and it's a weird one. It says face down creature spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. Now be careful, this does not mean that Right into Being costs 1 less. That's a spell that makes face down creatures, but it's not a face down creature spell. This explicitly refers to Morph. So Morph creatures cost 1 less to cast. That's fine. That's kind of cool. We've lost Trail of Mystery. We've lost Secret Plans. So, we need something to replace that to help us build those fun face-down decks. And I guess this is the card that's trying to do it. It has another line of text, though. It says, pay 1 and a green, turn Obscuring Aether face down. So apparently when you're sick and tired of this card being on the battlefield, you can make it into a 2/2. That doesn't seem very good to me. By the time I'm sick of this card being on the battlefield is going to be turn 4 or 5 or 6. By the time casting a Morph isn't really something I need to have that discount mana anymore. But turn 4, 5, 6, 7 is where a 2/2 doesn't really matter to me. So I don't really quite get this card. Being able to morph on turn 2 instead of turn 3, that's kind of cool. Being able to make 2 morphs on turn 4, that's kind of cool, I guess. But I don't see the value of putting this card in my deck. I'd rather just put another morph in my card, or another morph card in my deck and wait until turn 3 to cast them. This feels kind of like Hardened Scales to me, honestly. Hardened Scales, it's a pretty cool effect. Getting an extra +1/+1 counter every time something gets a +1/+1 counter, that's really cool. But it's just not worth a card in your deck. And I think this is the same thing. Getting a 1 mana discount on your morphs, that's kind of cool. Having an enchantment turn into a 2/2 is cool-ish. But ultimately, I just don't think it's worth a card in your deck at all. I think this would much rather be anything else you have. So I've got to go with a D- on this one. Next up, we have Pinion Feast. I don't know what a pinion is offhand. 4 and a green instant at common. Destroy target creature with flying. Bolster 2. Now, what have I been saying all week? I've been saying this is the set that has the most flyers ever printed. Does that mean that playing a card that says destroy target creature with flying is main deckable? And that's going to be the big question coming out of the first couple of weeks of this format, because the answer might be yes. There are some formats where flyer-specific removal is absolutely main deckable. And this might be one of those formats. Now, I don't necessarily care for the fact that it's 5 mana, but hey, we've got to pay for those 2 +1/+1 counters, don't we? I feel like there might be some better choices for your flyer removal. Things like Windstorm, although Windstorm is in cons, never mind. Things like Return to the Earth, it's 4 mana, so it's 1 cheaper. You don't get the Bolster 2, but it's still a removal spell. So this grade's going to be in limbo for a little bit. If flyer removal is not main deckable, this is just D+. The plus because of the bolster. If flyer removal is main deckable, this is going to bump up. It's going to bump up to a C, I think. Maybe even a C+, but I'm really hesitant about that 5 mana. Now, most of the targets that you're really going to want to hit with this are going to not be down before turn 5 or have just recently come down on turn 4 or turn 5. This grade's going to be in limbo. If flyer removal is main deckable, I'm going to go with a C+. If flyer removal is not main deckable, I'm going to go with a D+. But that's going to be one of the big questions that we all need to figure out in the first couple of weeks. So keep that in mind. Keep in mind if flyer removal is main deckable or not. All right, next up we have Press the Advantage, which has kind of strange art on it. The art is it's kind of like old Magic art a little bit. It doesn't have that kind of over-processed computer graphics looking art on it. It's kind of the old style. I kind of like it. It's 2 green instant at uncommon, and it says up to 2 target creatures each get +2/+2 and gain trample until end of turn. So 2 creatures get +2/+2. That's totally fine for 4 mana. That's totally fine. It's slightly more expensive than Awaken the Bear, but you get a slightly weaker Awaken the Bear twice without trample, unfortunately. It's a bit better on the offense than it is on the defense, which is one of my considerations when I'm thinking about how good a combat trick is, especially in green. We talked about this yesterday or the day before, how I really like my removal spells like Awaken the Bear, where they're cheap enough but powerful enough to be useful on both offense and defense. Both when your creature is being blocked and when it's not, and when you're blocking. This, unfortunately, is a bit better on offense, because on defense, of course, to get the full value, you need to be double blocking, and there's problems that could arise there. But it's still versatile enough to be totally playable, I think, if you're in the market for a combat trick. So I'm going to go with a C on it. Not the best of combat tricks, but a totally and utterly playable one. Next up, we have Revealing Wind. Revealing Wind is a 2 and a green instant at common, and it says prevent all damage that would be dealt... very important combat damage that would be dealt this turn. So it's fog. But it also says you may look at each face-down creature that's attacking or blocking. So if your opponent's coming in with some face-down creatures, you can say, no damage is being dealt by anybody, and I get to take a peek at them. Is that good? No. No, it's very, 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 very not. Fog is an awesome skill tester card. New players, weaker players love Fog because they think about all those times where they're about to win but they're about to lose, and they play Fog and they don't lose and then they win. Unfortunately, what they don't think about is that those times are very few and far between, and the times where Fog sits in their hands and does nothing are significantly more common. So we don't play Fogs. Fogs are bad. There are good Fog-ish spells out there, but they are asymmetrical Fog effects. Spells that say creatures your opponent control don't do combat damage this turn. That's not how magic wording happens exactly. But your creatures still do damage. Winds of Calcisma, for example, with the Ferocious trigger, very important caveat there, is a decent spell. Symmetrical, nothing happens this turn Fogs are bad. Tacking on an extraordinarily minimal advantage of being able to look at your creatures or your opponent's face-down creatures does not make it better at all. This is solid F. Don't take it. Don't play it. Next up, we have Salt Road Ambushers. This is a 3 and a green 3/3 creature Hound Warrior at uncommon. It says, whenever another permanent you control is turned face up, if it's a creature, put 2 +1/+1 counters on it. Megamorph, 3 green. Well, this is interesting. 4 mana 3/3. That's relatively standard. Usually it has an ability on it, and this one does have an ability, and it's a pretty decent ability. The Megamorph is something I feel I might not do as often as just casting it. You know, I guess it'd be cool for this guy to be a 4/4 on turn 5, but I'd much rather have him as a 3/3 on turn 4, and then start flipping up other things and making them bigger. I feel like in a Megamorph Manifest deck, this thing seems pretty insane. It turns Megamorph into a single counter into 3 counters, which is totally okay. Ultimately, I think I'm pretty happy to play this card if I'm going to be in kind of that Megamorph Manifest deck, which I think is still going to be a fairly decent deck in this format, like it has been in the last 2. I give this guy a B-. I think he looks really fun and really powerful to play with. Next up, we have Salt Road Quartermasters. Salt Road Quartermasters is a 2 and a green 1/1 creature human soldier at uncommon. It's not just a 1/1 though. Salt Road Quartermasters enters the battlefield with 2 +1/+1 counters on it, so it's a 3/3 for 3. You can pay 2 and a green to remove a +1/+1 counter from Salt Road Quartermasters in order to put a +1/+1 counter on target creature, so you can move these counters off of Quartermasters onto something else, and that's pretty okay. Dagatar was kind of good, but he was a bit beefier than these guys were. These guys are kind of like little Dagatar almost. It seems decent. A 3/3 for 3 is totally fine. It has counters, which, as we've seen, can be relevant. There can be a counters deck. Whether or not it's good remains to be seen. I'd like it to be good, but I don't know. Being able to shift those counters elsewhere is pretty nice as well. That gives you some versatility on what you want the potential counters bonuses to go towards the pseudo Outlast lords of the sets, if you will, that we don't quite have. Not a high pick, but totally playable, I think, in most green decks. Probably won't get cut all that often at all. And that means we're going to go with a C+ on it. Next up, we have Sandstep Scavenger. Sandstep Scavenger is a 4 and a green creature Hound Scout 2/2 at common, and it says when Sandstep Scavenger enters the battlefield, bolster 2. Now, bolster 2 is fun, but this guy is a 5-drop, and he is a 2/2 5-drop, which means that bolster is very, 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 very frequently going to be hitting this guy. So he's a 4/4 for 5. And that's what you probably should really expect from this guy, I think, the majority of the time. Unfortunately, that's not that great. It's counters, and there could be counters matters cards in your deck. Yeah. But ultimately, I don't think this guy's all that good because I think the bolster is just going to go on himself. And I don't necessarily want to be playing vanilla 4/4s for 5. Now, of course, if you can explicitly manufacture situations where those two counters go elsewhere, maybe this guy's a little bit better. But I still don't necessarily like him. I don't think he's a high pick. I don't think he's necessarily safe from being cut all that often. I'm going to go with a C-. I think he's more cuttable than he is playable. Next up, we have Scale Guard Sentinels. Scale Guard Sentinels is a green-green 2/3 creature human soldier at uncommon. As an additional cost to cast Scale Guard Sentinels, you may reveal a dragon card from your hand. Scale Guard Sentinels enters the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter on it if you revealed a dragon card or controlled a dragon as you cast Scale Guard Sentinels. I first saw this pretty early into the spoilers set, and I was very high on it. I loved this card because this was Dragons of Tarkir. I'll reveal one of the 7 dragons that I have in my deck and say, haha, this guy is a 3/4 for 2, and a 3/4 for 2 sounds really good to me. Then I saw the spoilers come out, and I saw the cycles, and I saw the final card image gallery go up. And I came to my prediction that I don't think there's going to be that many dragons in any one given draft deck. I think you're going to see dragons go around. I think dragons are going to be a presence that are known in the draft pod. But due to the unplayability, or at least the fringe playability of the uncommon dragons, or at least the monocolored ones that we've looked at so far, we'll talk about another 5 uncommon dragons tomorrow. But due to the unplayability and due to the really good ones being at rare or even mythic rare, I don't think you're going to be all that commonly having a dragon to reveal or having a dragon on the battlefield to activate this ability. So I think this is the majority of the time going to be a 2/3 for 2, which is still fine. A 2/3 for 2 is fine. It is green, which kind of hurts it a little bit. Green is fine when you're getting a cool ability out of it, when you're getting a 3/2 out of it. It's less good when you're getting a 2/3 out of it. So I'm going to go with a C+ on this. Yeah, I just don't think you're going to have dragons enough or commonly enough to confidently assume you're going to be getting the activation out of this guy too often. So I'm going to go with a C+. Playable, but cuttable if you need to. Next up is Segmented Crotech. This is a 5 and a green 6/5 creature insect at common that you could megamorph if you wanted to for 6 and a green. And that's it. Nothing else. No abilities. It is a 6/5 for 6 or a 7/6 for 7. Don't. Don't play it. Don't play vanilla 6/5s. Don't play vanilla 6/5s for 6. That is. Don't play vanilla 7/6s for 7. You're just going to be sad. Tusk Colossa is a very similar card. It's a 6/5 for 6, I believe it was, and it was very unplayable. I saw some people play it, and I never really cared about it. And I think this guy is exactly the same. I don't care about this guy. I don't want to pick him. I don't want to play him. I guess I could give him a D- because he's a creature, and if you desperately needed one, you could play it. But I think more realistically, it's just a flat-out F. Next up, we have Servant of the Scale. Servant of the Scale is a 1 single green 0/0 creature human soldier at common. Now, presumably counters are going to happen, and they are. Servant of the Scale enters the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter on it, so it's a 1/1 for 1. When Servant of the Scale dies, put X +1/+1 counters on target creature you control, where X is the number of +1/+1 counters on Servant of the Scale. That's interesting. So when this dies, another creature is going to get at least 1 counter. Presumably. I guess if this got a -1/-1 counter, actually there would be no counters left on it. But presumably another creature is going to get 1 counter. But how many more? is it going to get? I don't think that many. Yeah, this could get hit and would be the first target for a bolster card, but, I think the variance is just too high on this. I think far too often it's just going to be a 1/1 that when it dies gives a counter to something, and I don't think that's worth playing. I think this is just too vanilla of a 1/1 and too high variance in its ability to be anything relevant. So I'm going to go with a D+. If you really, really need to, or if you've somehow put together just an insane counters deck, then maybe this could go a little bit higher, or maybe you could play it if you wanted. But I'm going to go with a D+. I don't really want to play this. Next up, we have Shaman of the Forgotten Ways. This is a 2 and a green, 2/3 creature human shaman at Mythic Rare. It says, tap, add 2 mana in any combination of colors to your mana pool. Spend this mana only to cast creature spells. Formidable, 9 green, tap. Each player's life total becomes the number of creatures he or she controls. Activate this ability only if creatures you control have total power 8 or greater. I was on a huge roller coaster of emotions reading this card when it was spoiled. Mana dorks are awesome and limited. I love mana dorks. This mana dork costs 3 mana. That's a little bit more than I like to pay for them usually, but it makes 2 mana of whatever I want in whatever combination, and that's fantastic. Yes, you have to spend it on creatures. The majority of your deck by far is going to be creatures. It's not a downside that the mana can only be used for creatures. The ability, though, the formidable ability, 11 mana is a lot, and a number that you do not get to in Limited the vast majority of the time. Now, I've said this to people, and people have said, well, no, I remember getting to 11 mana. I got to 11 mana last week. What they don't remember is just how frequently they did not get to 11 mana. This guy's ability, his formidable ability, may as well not exist in Limited. Ignore the card. Everything past must be used on creatures is flavor text. It's just not something you should even consider when you take this card. But the text that you should consider is awesome. Adding 2 mana in any combination of colors to your mana pool on a 2/3 for 3 is fantastic. It's a pretty resilient mana dork that's going to make a good amount of mana for you. I love this card. I can't put it into A range. A is reserved for cards that are going to win me the game, cards that are going to have a huge impact on the field when they come down. This does not do that, but it's going to give the highest grade I can justify giving it, and that's a B+. It's fantastic. I'm going to be super excited if I open a pack with this card in it. Next up, we have Shape the Sands. Shape the Sands is a single green instant at common. Target creature gets 0/5 and gains reach until end of turn. Unfortunately, this just doesn't seem that good to me. It's going to, a lot of the time, just be fog, because there's no power boosting at all. Sometimes you'll be able to hit something out of the sky, and your creature will even get to live a little bit longer because of that +5 boost. But, it's pretty rare that I find a +0/+X spell playable, and this is just not one of them. As I said, the majority of the time this is going to be fog, and that's just not something you want to play. So I'm going to go with a D- on it. I won't give it an F because, yeah, of course, there's going to be times where you play this on a 5/5 and it smacks a 4/4 flyer out of the air. Sure, that'll happen sometimes, but I don't think it's worth wasting an entire card slot on. Next up, we have Sheltered Eyrie. Sheltered Eyrie is a 2 and a green enchantment aura at common, and it says Enchant Land. Enchanted Land has tap. Add 2 mana of any one color to your mana pool. So it's ramp. So you, on turn 3, play this on a land, and suddenly that land gets a second ability where you tap it for 2 mana of any color. So it's ramp and color fixing. It's unfortunate that it sits at 3 mana where you want to be morphing. But it is ramp and color fixing, so certain decks are definitely going to get some use out of this. If a 4 or 5 color good stuff deck exists, it's going to be built off the back of this card and cards like it. I think ultimately it's a bit too narrow to really be playable. There's better ramp spells, Explosive Vegetation, for example. So I'm going to go with a D+ on it. But I think if you do manage to go the 4 or 5 color kind of good stuff deck, this is going to be a card that's going to go up in value a little bit more. So I'm going to go with a D+ on it. Next up, we have Sight of the Scale Lords. Sight of the Scale Lords is a 4 and a green enchantment at uncommon, and it says at the beginning of combat on your turn, creatures you control with toughness 4 or greater get +2/+2 and gain vigilance until end of turn. So, yeah. This is an enchantment that seems more like a win more card to me. You know, if by turn 5 or 6, which is when this is gonna come down and kind of start to be relevant, most likely, and you have a number of 4 toughness creatures, you should already be kind of ahead, right? You should already be in a decent position. So does giving them +2/+2 and vigilance until end of turn really do that much for you? And I don't think it does. I think I would prefer to just play one of the many really good 5-drop creatures instead of playing this and giving +2/+2 and vigilance to a small section of the creatures on my battlefield. Yeah, this is a card that is just going to be a dead card a little bit too often for me to like, and it takes up the 5-drop spot, which I think is going to be pretty reserved for bombs. So I don't want to play a non-bomb enchantment that may just do nothing for me. So I've got to go with a D, maybe even a D- on this one. I just don't think it's all that good. Next up, we have Stampeding Elk Herd. This is a 3 green 5/5 creature elk at common, and it has a formidable ability. It says whenever Stampeding Elk Herd attacks, if creatures you control have total power 8 or greater, creatures you control gain trample until end of turn. So your entire team gets trample when these guys attack if you have 8 power. And they're 5/5, so you don't need that much extra in order to have your entire team get trample. Is giving your entire team trample good? Well, yeah. You know, it's not going to be that awesome on a 2/2 or on a 3/3. But if you have any other bigger cards, it's going to be pretty fantastic giving your team trample, and giving your team trample every turn you attack. Outside of that, this is a 5/5 for 5, which I think is pretty solid. If it were any smaller, I wouldn't be as high on this card. But the fact that you're almost all the way to formidable just because of it by itself, I think does make it a pretty solid card. I'm actually going to give it a C+. I think it's far more playable than it is cuttable. I think you may still cut it sometimes when you have a bombier 5-drop. This isn't really a bomb 5-drop. It's just a decent 5-drop. But yeah, I'm going to go with a C+ on this, and I could see the ceiling even being slightly higher. Next up, we have Sunbringer's Torch. Sunbringer's Torch is a 2 green sorcery at rare, and it says Bolster X, where X is the number of cards in your hand. Each creature you control with a +1/+1 counter on it gains trample until end of turn. Yeah. We've talked about Bolster. We've talked about how I don't like Bolster for the sake of Bolster. I like repeatable Bolster. I like incidental Bolster on other very useful things. This is Bolster for the sake of Bolster. Not only that, but this is going to come down turn 4 at the earliest. And at that point, you're probably going to have, you know, maybe a creature that this could target. And you're going to have not a huge amount of cards in your hand, unless you've stumbled and you don't want to plan your deck around stumbling and missing land drops and missing plays and things like that. So, you know, this card unfortunately just becomes worse and worse and worse and worse the later the game gets, because you don't tend to keep a full hand of cards. And so, you know, later in the game, this is going to be Bolster 1 or 2 for 4, which seems awful. You know, in Fate Reforged, 4 mana gets us 3 guaranteed, and I don't think this is going to get you 3 guaranteed. I think this is going to get you much less. Now, yes, of course, you could just hold cards back for a long time, but that sounds like a really, really, really bad plan. So I think this is just a straight up F. I'm not going to play this. As I've said, I don't like bolster for the sake of bolster, and that's all this is. All right, only a couple cards to go. We've got Surrak, the Hunt Caller. So this is the new Surrak. This is a 2 green 5/4 legendary creature human warrior at rare. He has Formidable. At the beginning of combat on your turn, if creatures you control have power 8 or greater, target creature you control gains haste until end of turn. That's kind of a cool Formidable ability, not because you look at your board and say, aha, I have 8. I can cast something and give it haste. The cool thing is that you could play a 3/3. If Surrak is the only thing on the battlefield, Formidable would turn on, that 3/3 could then get haste, and you've basically dashed a creature in without having to return it back to your hand at the end of the turn. And that seems pretty cool. Completely ignoring the fact that this is a 5/4 for 4, which is awesome as is. I played Feral Krushock sometimes and felt fine playing it, and it was a 5/4 for 5. A 5/4 for 4, totally on board with. Plus, I think the ability is actually quite nice. Giving basically haste to almost anything you're going to play on turn 5 and later seems pretty darn good to me. So I'm going to go with an A- on Surrak the Hunt Caller. I think he's really solid and totally first pickable. Finally, the last green card we have is Tread Upon. This is a 1 and a green instant at common, and it says target creature gets +2/+2 and gains trample until end of turn. So it's 1 more than Giant Growth in the mana cost and 1 less than Giant Growth in the boost, but you get trample. It seems totally fine to me. It's a middle of the road combat trick. It's one of those tricks that is okay on offense or on defense, which means I like it. Kind of wish it was something else a little bit higher. Maybe Awaken the Bear, which I'm going to be sad to lose. That was a solid combat trick. It wasn't amazing by any stretch of the imagination. It was just solid for what it did. So this is going to be, I think, slightly less good than Awaken the Bear. So I'm going to go with a solid C. I think you'll play this just as often as you'll cut it. So that's about it for green. Green looks really fun. There's a lot of good cards in it. There's a lot of good ramp, which of course I love. I'm going to peg green, I think, as possibly my second favorite color in the format overall. It, of course, doesn't come near how awesome black and red's removal is. Wow. But black and red, on average, I don't think are nearly as good as green, and I think white is the best overall. But yeah, there's some fun cards. I'm excited to see a few of the mythics here, the Death Mist Raptor, the Shaman of the Forgotten Ways. But yeah, excited to play it. We've got one video left coming up. Tomorrow we're going to look at the gold cards. We're going to look at the artifact cards. We're going to look at the single colorless card. And we're going to look at the 2 lands. And I'm going to talk a little bit about pre-release and just some general wrap-up for the format. So stay tuned for that. As always, if you have any questions, comments, suggestions, you should definitely leave them in the comments. There's been some good discussion. And I've gotten a lot of positive feedback as well. I'm definitely very happy to have gotten that. I've been surprised almost by the positive feedback I've gotten to people thanking me. So everybody's thanked me. I think I've thanked you all and for the comments and for watching already. But if I haven't, thank you for watching, and I'll keep pumping out these videos for sure. You can also find me other places. You can find me on Twitter at The Mana Leek. That's L-E-E-K, like the vegetable, not the card. And you can find me on Facebook at facebook.com/The Mana Leek. You've already found me here on YouTube. Make sure that you like the videos. If you like them, click that little thumbs up icon. That helps my videos spread throughout the YouTube. And you should also subscribe to my channel. There's the little subscribe button down below this video. There's also going to be one in the outro in, 10-20 seconds or so. That will keep you up to date on all the latest videos, the Wacky Wednesdays, the Spiky Saturdays, and a couple of other weekly series that may be starting up relatively soon. So you want to stay tuned for those for sure. But as always, if you have questions, comments, suggestions, let me know. Otherwise, I will see you all tomorrow for the final set review video.